Hey everyone, David Chen here. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Wow, what a movie. One of my favorite movies of all time, possibly my favorite movie of all time. It's also just completed an extraordinary run at the box office. It became A24's highest grossing film of all time, beating out Uncut Gems for that honor. And it's currently available on video on demand. I have never done a review of this movie on my YouTube channel, and I wanted to. I wanted to get something out there where I could talk a little bit about it more in depth, full spoilers, just talk about all the ways that this movie meant something to me. And I figured out a way to do that, which is by talking to Walter Chaw from Film Freak Central about the film. So over the course of the next hour, you're going to hear us ramble and wax poetic and spoil and reflect on and talk about our own lives in relation to Everything Everywhere All at Once. So before we begin, I just want to remind you there's going to be full spoilers for this conversation. So don't watch this until after you've seen the film. This conversation will also include discussion of upsetting topics such as suicide, trauma, and abuse. So make sure you are aware of that before you watch. But I do hope you enjoy the conversation and get something out of it. I've left Walter's information underneath on Twitter and his review of this movie at Film Freak Central. Be sure to check those things out. And if you do enjoy this video, hey, give it a like and a subscribe and hit that bell icon, won't you? You'll get a notification every time I upload a new video. I generally talk about movies, TV, the media, and the internet and technology. So if any of that sounds appealing to you, check out my channel. Okay, let's get to my conversation with Walter Chaw about Everything Everywhere All at Once. Enjoy. I want to just start by asking you, why does this movie mean so much to you?
Well, we spend so much time complaining. I do. I want to pull you into it, but I feel like I spent a lot of time complaining about the lack of representation in films that are made in the United States for Asian Americans. And, I would be remiss not to shout from the rooftops when we finally have a piece of art of culture that feels uniquely ours. And even as I say that, I know how important this film is for other people who are not Asian American. I read a really interesting piece about how someone had read this as a movie about menopause and the chaos of menopause, and so it's that old maxim, right? That the more unique you make something, the more universal it becomes. Somehow, the more specific it is, the more general it becomes.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a case of that, where you and I have talked before, where it's like we both left it feeling like that was great, but it speaks only to me. It's too bad that no one else will like this film.
Yeah, I think you and
Only
I
to
both had
find
the
that,
same
yeah,
experience. We left it. We're like, well, I know I really enjoyed it. I have no idea if anyone else is going to enjoy it, but it really spoke to me.
absolutely.
And I think many people have read so many different things, including the creators of the film themselves. I think when they made the film in interviews, I've talked with them, and they've given interviews elsewhere. They made it in response to fracturing attention spans in the internet age. Like that was kind of one of their primary motivators and inspirations. But people are reading it as a metaphor for whatever is true for them. It's a metaphor for menopause. It's a metaphor for parenting. It's a
Hmm.
metaphor for the immigrant experience, and so on. And there is something really special about how this movie has managed to capture the imaginations of people going through any challenges of any kind.
I read this kind of like angry piece about this film, saying that the person writing it saying that they recommended this movie because it would make them feel good, or it would be interesting to them. I think was what it was, and they were offended at the idea of film as therapy. To
Mm-hmm.
sort of soothe intergenerational trauma. That we may be attaching to it, but for me, and I want to be clear that I don't think film is a substitute for therapy, but I do think that the way that we look at art and extant objects, if we can apply that to our emotions and how we respond to those things, it's like a Rorschach test. That 300 people look at a Rorschach test and they see different things. You might see a bat. I might see my mom not loving me. So there's uh, uh, there's that thing that art that's good can do, in that it becomes almost a blank screen, a mind screen. To steal a term from Bruce Kawen, that where you project uh, your emotions and your feelings and your desires and your fears onto an extant object. Because the film, for as brilliant as it is extant. It is an object, it can be projected on a screen. It's the same thing projected over and over and over again, thousands of times. But every single person that sees a different film because of their relationship to the world and their experiences and all those things. And that's true of every movie. It's true of every movie. But with a movie like this, it's so brilliant because it provokes these really deep introspective sessions, I think, from individual members of the audience, or it can potentially do that. I think there are a lot of films that you see a different film than the next guy, or whatever, but we all kind of see a bad movie. The details may be different, but the movie doesn't really say that much to us. But we watch a movie like this, and it's like the details matter a lot. If does this speak to you, Dave, about your relationship with your mom? Does it speak to me about my dad? Does it speak to the broad diaspora of experiences? Speaking with a friend who is has a dad who's Dominican, and he says, our issues in our family are completely different. We don't have problems talking to each other. It's not about secrets. It's about oversharing. It's about over
Mm.
interest. And this movie does that. It gets it. It gets the
Hmm.
frustration. It's like, it does. That's amazing. Or the menopause piece, or even the pieces that are critical of it. For me, they're all windows into these individuals and their experiences and their biases and the things that they have to work through or not, or things that they have worked through or haven't. Um, yeah, it's one of those rare films, right, where you look at it and it's broadly appealing. You can just watch it as entertainment if you want to. You never have to think beyond whatever it is, but it's also clearly attaching itself in a very personal way to people's shared experiences. And it's a movie that has successfully made me feel less lonesome, has made me feel a little less angry at my parents, has helped me understand their story better than I have ever understood it before. When I think of my parents, I never thought of them as being in love, as courting one another, as taking a big chance. And I never thought of that. I thought about the other stuff, the working yourself to death, and the weird expectations of your kids, and the resentment of the new culture, and all that stuff that's common with a lot of people that were born here and their parents who weren't. But through this movie, I kind of understand their story as a love story. I understand it in a completely different way, in a humanizing way, and I think
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
remarkable. Yeah, it's remarkable.
I, just speaking for me, I love the movie. Obviously, it's possibly my favorite movie of all time. I think uh, there's a couple things about it that I really. It has basically every single thing that I love about movies in one movie, right?
Yep.
For one thing, I'm really have always been fascinated by time travel and multiverses and alternate realities, these kinds of things, and obviously that's a huge part of this movie. Uh, it's a immigrant story, and specifically a story about Asian American immigrants. And you were talking about representation earlier and how it's challenging. We have okay representation now, Asian Americans in general, but what is more challenging these days is good representation. I watched Top Gun Maverick recently, and there's a shot there. The way it plays out on screen is there's a shot of like these Asian people that show up to like the flight academy, and it's like, oh, Harvard and Yale are here. Now I know like one of the guys is actually white, but like one of the guys Harvard or Yale is actually white, but like, uh, I don't think any Asian characters get more than like two lines in the entire movie, right? And so it's like, okay, that's technically representation, but I wouldn't say it's great representation. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
I was kind of shocked when you said that there were Asian people in that movie. I had no recollection of that. I just kind of like completely missed me.
that's just one
Yeah,
example. I don't mean to pick on Top Gun Maverick, which is a movie I love. I'm just
I
saying
love that
that
movie. Yeah.
it's hard to get representation at all, but even harder is to get good representation. And I think what this movie does, I think what Everything Everywhere All at Once does, is it takes a fairly common trope at this point, which is like the immigrant story. Like people have seen the immigrant story play out in many movies throughout the years at this point. And it extends the ideas into something science fiction, fantastical, that has epic scope. And that's what I really appreciate about it. It's not just, hey, this is another immigrant story. It's like, what if the immigrant story was merely the surface level of a much deeper exploration of some of the themes that come with an immigrant story.
Yeah,
And
it feels
so,
like our
yeah.
Godfather in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, which is another great immigrant story.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it opens the first line of the Godfather is I believe in America.
Hmm.
You know, and we've never really had that. You know, to your point about representation, I think so much of it is bordering on tokenism, where it's just we're just going to we're going to fill all of the periphery with every checklist item that we can pack in there, and the danger of that is that we would name a character at Harvard or after an Ivy League
Yeah.
school, just like it's like I think of Peanuts, Charlie Brown, and there's the one African American kid, who doesn't speak and communicates through high fives. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't know that that's actually a character. I don't know that that's actually representation. We're kind of now switching terms now to like tokenism. You kind of threw it in there because you know that you should. I'm not saying that about Charles Schultz. I mean, 1960, whatever. But with Top Gun, perhaps. And again, yeah, we both love that movie, whatever. But I think we see that a lot, even in movies that are explicitly about you know throwing us a bone, kind of like
Hmm.
Shang-Chi
Hmm.
or the English speaking Mulan. It's like, this is not actually good for us that you keep doing this shit. You can't
Hmm.
say, oh, he's just a slacker, but he does know 6 languages and kung fu. His dad's also a serpent god, and he has this. Was like, wait. You seem to have actually a lot of contempt for Asian Americans when you do something like that. So
Hmm.
there's a fine line, and here's Everything Everywhere, which has characters that are not special. I mean, she's explicitly not special. She, and I would argue with that. There's nuances, obviously, but the thing that we're centering on her because she runs a laundromat. We're centering on her because she's going to the IRS. And I've heard some complaints from white viewers that oh, IRS. I don't like that. They're the villains here. Like, well, first, stop being such a bootleg. Next, I would say that the IRS actually does target immigrant businesses because so many of them work under the table. Or
Hmm.
they don't declare everything. And so, yeah, my parents, they were business owners. They were audited
Yeah,
a couple
my
of
parents are
times.
business owners too, and it was, we were law-abiding citizens, so it wasn't like we had terrible interactions with the IRS, but it wasn't fun. It's not like the highlight of their day to go see the IRS. But going back to your point about this being an immigrant story, where it really hit home for me is in one of those first scenes when Michelle Yeoh's character first gets on the elevator and Ki Hui Kwan's character gives her the Bluetooth headsets and downloads the entire thing, and then she sees her entire existence play out before her eyes, and it's shot very beautifully. It looks like it's it almost is like a kind of old school film effect. It almost looks like 16 millimeter or whatever. I'm sure it was actually shot on digital, but um, and you see her entire existence and the decision to come to the United States and the kind of dreams that these people had and how those dreams didn't quite end up working out as they'd hoped. And when I watched that scene for the first time, I felt like I was watching. It hit me so hard emotionally because I felt like I was watching my parents' life compressed into 30 seconds. And obviously the details are very different. These characters had a laundromat. My parents owned a Chinese restaurant. Um, and the Chinese restaurant was like relatively successful. It wasn't like it was a failure or falling apart or anything like that. Like by the end of our time doing it, the restaurant was in a good state. But just the whole thing was kind of like you get a sense of how many leaps these people had to take, right? A leap to be with each other, a leap to come to a foreign country, a leap to start a business, a leap to start a family, like all these massive life changes and going out on a limb and leap of faith kind of things that you just don't normally contemplate when you're going about your day-to-day business. But when you're watching a movie like this and you see a montage edited together in like 30 seconds that like seems to compress all that time, it's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it made me feel shame about my solipsism, for most of my life as the child, even though I'm quite elderly now. But there's the sense that I never really fully appreciated what my parents did to get us here.
hmm
I didn't fully ever appreciate um, th- how scary. Imagine how scary it would be if you picked up right now and moved to a country where you didn't really speak the language to
yeah.
start your life there, and that you knew that you were going to be there for the rest of your life, and what was going to happen with you and your family. And the what really got me about that sequence was the schism that you see between her and her father. Yeah, the Michelle Yeoh character
hmm
and her father, the James Hong character. And I had never considered the ties that they broke within their family by coming
Yeah.
here too.
Yeah.
I have a huge extended family that I don't know at all in Taiwan and mainland China, like a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Same. Same.
And I don't know them. I think I visited Taiwan when I was 3. That's it. And I've never
And
met
there's
them. I've
probably some
never
of
had a
them that aren't
communication.
happy that your,
I'm sure.
parents came to the United States, and we just
Absolutely.
never knew about it, right?
Absolutely. I know that my dad's younger brother or was the last time I saw him, like decades ago, a very staunchly Chinese nationalist, even though he was living in Taiwan. And it was his fervent belief that Taiwan would one day reunify with the Chinese mainland, that they're just Chinese people. It's like, what must he have felt about my dad coming to the United States? When I watched The Farewell, the Lulu Wang film from a couple of years ago, there's that character as well that's sort of bragging about how good the Chinese universities are, and then talking about American education. All this. Those are all conversations that I've heard and have had, but I've never considered it from the sense of loss, the sense of they're isolated out here, they're maybe even pariahs for having moved, and
hmm
I did feel, because of this film, in a really good way, I think I felt shame about my lack of empathy for what my parents did do. I just
hmm
wrapped up in my own pain. I'm just wrapped up in my, I
Right.
don't belong here. People think I'm a monster, and I was wrapped up in that for my whole life. And
hmm
it's like, not only is that like hyperbolic, it's not true. I've been quite accepted, but just the idea that I didn't know. I didn't know, and I was too selfish to think about it. And what a wonderful film! What a wonderful gift to have pieces of you returned to you that you didn't know that you were missing.
hmm
It's like, oh,
hmm
here's this piece of of your maturity and your wisdom and your empathy that has been missing, and you didn't know that you dropped it along the way, but you did, and you didn't understand the pain that your parents were in, and the faith and courage and love that it took for them to come out here. Love was not even a word in our household. We don't use that word, And so,
Yeah.
for that to come back into my vocabulary when I speak about my parents is it's an immeasurable gift.
Yeah.
Um,
And in your review at Film Freak Central for Everything Everywhere All at Once, you talked about how the movie helped you understand their story as a love story instead of an immigrant story. Can you give me the contrast between those two things? Like, how did you think of their story before? How do you think of it now? And why did it change because of the movie?
well, because of the culture that we're brought up in here, I saw them as, I think, this culture sees them: industrious, emotionally cold. They've given their life over to a job. They have strict cultural standards, and my parents were actually more bohemian than other parents. There's sort of like that line that really got me in everything everywhere as well, where she says, just me being cool with you having a girlfriend is already quite progressive, is already quite something. My parents were kind of like that parent. That
Yeah.
compared to their Chinese friends, they were probably looked at upon as, oh, their kids are running wild. But yeah, I saw them the way that I think this culture sees them as, they open stores. They are very smart. My dad was very good at math, and I it's the immigrant story that you were laying out earlier.
Right.
We're
And
going to
you
open a
see them as
restaurant,
kind
we
of like
open
two
whatever.
dimensional, basically, like kind of two dimensional beings, pretty much. A
Exactly,
set of
exactly.
ideas or tendencies as opposed to like fully fleshed
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't credit them with the full panoply of emotions.
Yes.
There was
Well,
just
many
this and
many
this.
Asian
That's
parents
it.
make it easy to do that. So to be fair,
Alas,
so yeah,
it's so,
yeah.
and not even just Asian parents, but I wonder even if that sort of closed offness is partly a product of culture, but also partly a product of of trauma, of strain, of fear, and of what they had to go through. I see a lot of 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 Asian families that are very supportive. I went to my
Mm.
daughter's graduation from high school a few weeks ago, and I saw Asian parents there, and I joked to my wife. I was like, "What are they doing here? Who's watching the store?" Because my parents didn't come, to my stuff, and
Right,
I
right.
didn't even go to my high
Well,
school graduation.
it's because this generation had parents that didn't come to their stuff, and they're like, "We're not going to do that again next time." You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly, and the whenever I joke like that, it's out of a sense of like jealousy, kind of.
Hmm.
Like this. That sucks, man. I would have felt so much better about myself
Hmm.
if my parents had showed up at one of these recitals. They showed up at one of these things, or made it seem like it was important. But now I realize I see it differently for them. Like that, for them, I really believe they were like, look, that's awesome. I wish we could be there, but we really have to keep working here so that he can have everything that he needs. And I'm like, that's kind of an old thing. I'm being kind of inarticulate about it too because it's getting too personal, maybe. But it's like it's this idea that we prioritize the wrong things in our lives sometimes. All my wife wants is to be for me to be available to her, and here I am thinking I have to work 120 hours a week. I have to give her the things that she wants. I have to do the right thing. I have to be a good husband, a good whatever. And I wonder how much of my parents, weren't wrapped up in the wrong thing, not out
Hmm.
of malice or coldness, but out of what they felt like they needed to do to survive here and stay here.
And
Um,
I think it goes beyond just survival, but it's also just something we've also experienced as immigrants. My guess is this notion of trying to impart upon your parents, trying to impart upon you the values, tendencies, personas of the old world versus what you are learning in the new world. And I think that a great example of this is early on in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Uh, they've just had a challenging interaction. The daughter Joy is trying to introduce her girlfriend to her grandfather, played by James Hong, legend. Everyone's a legend in this movie. Uh, and uh, and her mom won't introduce her as her girlfriend. She would just introduce her as her good friend. And Joy storms off, and she's very upset. And then uh, her mom comes to the car, and you know that the mom wants to say something conciliatory. The mother, like part of her intellectually, is saying, I must say something to her that is kind and positive, but she just can't physically bring herself to do it because that's simply not how her family expressed anything, let alone love to each other.
You you have to try and eat healthier.
that's extraordinarily powerful and kind too, isn't it? To say like, you know, they feel these things, but they can't express them in a way that we understand them. When my wife first met my relatives when they flew in for our wedding, I was translating the whole time, and with a big grin on my face, I would say to her, "She's telling me that I got real fat. She's telling me that I need to study better.
Yeah, and
She's
we should
telling
point out
me
your
that I was
wife
a."
is white, correct? And
She
so
is exactly,
she couldn't
exactly, yeah.
understand the language yet, but yeah.
Well, and when my dad died, there were people that were close to my mother who came up to me, at the funeral or at the hospital, and said, "This is your fault. You're the reason that he died
Hmm.
because you weren't a good enough son. You weren't around when he needed you." And it's like,
That's
oh,
horrible, by the way. I'm sorry that that
yeah,
happened.
no, no, it's
But you seem to have
well,
a good, you know,
it wasn't
taking
great.
it in stride. Yeah,
Well,
we're
I
laughing
mean,
to keep from crying about it.
yeah, because at the end of the day, what choice do you have? But you get so wrapped up in that drama and all the series of like hits, right? You just take these hits, and the big thing for me, and I think we talked about this on the film cast was, when I found out my dad was in the hospital, I went there, and my mom was already there with a bunch of her buddies, and she wouldn't talk to me. She was pointed to a door, and I thought, oh, he's in there. And I went in there, and he was in a body bag, and a orderly came in and unzipped him so that I could see him. And I came back out of the room, kind of blindsided, and I tried to hug my mom, and she pushed me away and went back to her buddies. And so it's like watching this movie helped me forgive her for that, in my mind anyway, in my heart for that, before she died. And I'm like, that's a burden I got to put down because this
What?
movie showed me something different.
Why do you think the movie helped you to do that? I'm just curious.
Just because I think it gave depth to my mother that I never gave her before.
Mm-hmm.
It gave shape to her trauma, her sense of being left by me, divorced by me, the way that I rejected, their culture. It gave shape to that. It gave a human element to it. It made what she was going through a tragedy instead of a tragedy that she was inflicting on me. And it humanized her in a lot of ways for me. And at the same time, it also gave me the space to be not resolved in a traditional Western Hallmark kind of way. My dad lived for 2 years after a heart attack that eventually killed him through heart failure and all those things. And we never had a moment of like, we're going to go fly fishing. And as the sun sets over the mountains and the golden light bounces off, we never had that. And, I have a lot of friends who mean well, who's like, okay, well, you missed your chance, but you can do it with your mom. And I'm like, you don't know my mom. The very last night of her life, which was Mother's Day, because that's her sense of humor. I went to the hospice to sort of sit vigil with her, and I was essentially kind of like informed that I don't think Mom would have wanted anyone in the room with her. She would have been kind of irritated that you were here, so maybe not be here. I was like, okay,
who informed you? Who informed you?
My sister. She's not wrong though, because I think my mom was kind of communicating she wanted to be left alone, and she kind of said that, in the a couple days before she died. She said, "No more visitors," and my wife was like, "Do you think she means everybody, or just like friend visitors? Does she mean the family?" I was like, "Oh yeah." Yeah. She means that just kind of leave her alone right now because she doesn't have any kind of emotional skills to process end of life conversations or apologies or here's my last moment of no 5 easy pieces where I have a long conversation with my mute father on the beach or something. There's nothing that's not the resolution that was in the cards for us because of the way that we communicate. And this film allows for that, even at the very end of it, right, where there's in the parking lot again, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
I
was about to bring that
there
up.
There isn't a big, hey, I love you, come here, I accept you, I think everything that you did in school was valuable, you're pretty smart, you're going to be super successful, and I think you make good decisions. There's nothing like that. It's like, yeah, you do drive me crazy, you should eat better. It breaks my heart that you don't want to be working the laundromat, but that's okay. And she says, her daughter says, yeah, it's okay, we're both screwed up. Yeah. That's who we are. And that's freeing, that's
well,
freeing.
There's also the kind of epilogue that happens where they're back at the IRS, they're in the parking lot, and you see that Joy is with her girlfriend, and then she says, the mom, Evelyn, says to the girlfriend, I think it's Becky is her name.
It's okay. Becky, you need to grow your hair.
I really appreciated that because it's basically her mom showing that she kind of accepts her. I know for like a Westerner watching this, it might seem really messed up that that's the case, but it's like, that is how people like Evelyn communicate their love, is by providing criticism, providing unsolicited feedback. And in a way, and they kind of took it that way too. They kind of accepted it in that way in the moment. Becky and Joy accepted it in that way. And there is this aspect of that, the relationship has progressed, even though outwardly Evelyn's just dropping some more criticism bombs on them, like inwardly they understand that like, oh, this is her way of showing love, and I appreciated that. So
Yeah, there's balance to that sequence too, because earlier on, something like that, very similar like that, happens in the chaos of the opening when they're kind of walking through the laundromat and everything. And Becky's like, doesn't that mean that she cares though? Doesn't it? She's trying to get Joy to, but she doesn't accept that. She's very injured by that, right? And then at the very end, they have kind of the same sequence happening again that you've just described. And to your point, Joy accepts it this time. She hears it differently in this time, and she gives
yes,
her mom a break. And it's like, I was always of a mind that, well, they're the parents. They should meet me more than halfway. They should meet me right here in my wheelhouse. They should understand my heart.
right.
But gosh, that's so unrealistic and unfair, really. And
Hmm.
every relationship is a negotiation and a compromise. I was like thinking about this the other day, that your kids actually teach you the parents that they need, and it's your choice whether or not you're going to meet them there, or you're just going to tell them to go screw. But you do have to meet them somewhere. And as kids, they got to meet you somewhere. I'll never stop making bad jokes with the kids. I'll never stop referring to my daughter as a little baby. I can't stop it. I can't. They're going to have to meet me somewhere, in the middle
Hmm.
there, even if that drives them crazy. And understand that when I do that, I'm telling them I love them, in the best, most comfortable way that I can. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't learn to speak their language and everything, and there's got to be a give and take. But it did help me forgive, as an older person. It did help me forgive my parents and their inability to communicate in a way that I wanted to hear, and in a way that I saw my friends' parents being communicated to, and everything. The film
Hmm.
does give me the outlet, to say, I'm a bigger person than this. I'm not really a child anymore. There's a moment that I can say, I get it, and you gave up a lot to be here, and I'm grateful for that. I respect what you did.
It's interesting that the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once tells the story from the perspective of Evelyn, because most of the time when we've seen a story like this told, it's from the perspective of the child, right? And it's very, I'm thinking of many other examples. Turning Red, another movie that this movie has actually been compared to, right? And it's from the perspective of the child, and I think it's just really an interesting decision to frame it from the perspective of the mom, because it's very rare that we accept those types of people in our society in their fullness. Even you and me, who have Asian immigrant parents as our parents, have had difficulty accepting them in their fullness, right? And seeing all the challenges that they've been through, and seeing like, hey, maybe they had dreams too that like weren't quite fulfilled by this current set of circumstances, right? And you and me, you and I are a lot in our own feelings about like what level of dreams we were able to achieve. And we haven't really thought that much about like what were our parents really striving for anyway, And I think that's one thing that this movie opens up the aperture for, is like allowing us to get it to kind of perceive this different perspective and empathize with it. So
Yeah, my favorite line from Lost in Translation, and I don't know it verbatim, but he tells the Bill Murray character, talks about having kids and saying how terrified you are, and then they come, and then they're all of a sudden the most interesting people that you've ever met, and that's always like devastated me, because I never had that experience with my parents. I don't know that my parents ever really knew who I was as an adult.
hmm
And there's a problem, I think, with, I won't just say everyone experiences this in our culture, but I certainly experienced it. There's a problem when you have sort of a closed off emotional relationship with your parents, that you never have sort of like this reconnection that's vital, I think, with your kids at a certain point, where you kind of are reintroduced as adults, where you say, yeah, I am the kid that pooped my pants in first grade, and I'm the kid that disappointed you terribly when I shoplifted when I was 13. But I'm now a full ass grown adult with my own kids or my own problems and my own mortgage. And I kind of
hmm
get where you're coming from, and let's kind of be, but we don't have that. And the movie kind of works as almost
why
like a
why don't
shunt.
why don't you have that in your opinion?
Well, I think
Maybe
I always
because you're
felt
so
like a
vastly
kid.
different than them,
Yeah,
like personality wise.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally, and also my own immaturity when I was around them. I mean, there are people, I think, in everyone's lives, but for me, it was my parents. Where when you're around them, you're kind of the worst version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was around my parents, I'm suddenly the kid who's like the rebel. It's like, yeah, I'm going to wear mascara. Yeah, I'm going to go watch The Cure. You know, but I was like that into my 30s. You know, with them, I was sort of like, oh, damn it. You know, I don't want to see them anymore. They drive me nuts, and all of the old hurts are kind of unresolved and irresolvable in our relationship unless one of us or both of us were willing to put it down. And I was never really willing to put it down, just because I was too much pain. I think, you know, and you know, here's a film I think that does offer that kind of bridge, that does offer like sort of this, like, oh, okay, now I understand my parents in a way that they could never articulate to me. You know, they're not going to talk to me about the pain of leaving their home. They're not going to talk to me about the terror of the IRS. They're not going to talk to
Yeah.
me about the burden of working 11 hours a day, 24/7. They're not going to do that with me. I'm never going to be reintroduced to them as equals or as you know, any kind of peer or adult. They're always going to be the disapproving parents, and I'm always going to be the kid that disappoints
Yeah.
if we can't have that moment, and the film provides that moment in an interesting
Going
way.
back to one of the original points about like this being a movie that everyone can read their own thing into, right? For me, I was so convinced coming out. I was like, "Oh, this is clearly a movie about the expectations that immigrant parents put on their children." Many immigrant parents, notoriously, have extremely high standards for their kids, and the idea, the central plot point of this movie is that the Evelyn of Alphaverse pushed Joy, her child, so hard that Joy's mind became fractured and was unable to deal with reality, and that she was able to perceive everything everywhere all at once, was able to have like the full knowledge of every thing in the multiverse, and that ultimately this sent her into, I guess, a spiral of depression and nihilism, and like nothing matters, right?
Those overloaded mind usually dies. Instead, her mind was fractured.
That is a very common experience. I mean, without the multiverse part, but everything about that experience resonates with certainly a lot of people that I grew up with, where your parents have extremely high expectations for you. So many expectations that you uh, as the person who is the recipient of those expectations, feel like you are desperately trying to just comprehend all the universe of possibilities that might happen as a result, and that this ends up making everything feel meaningless as a result. And so that's what I saw as the central metaphor, you know. And we each took different things out of it. You took kind of an empathy for your parents and their existence, and for me, it was this idea of, wow, they made the expectations of immigrant parents into basically a sci-fi adventure story, right? And we're trying to like surmount this, and the way out of it is, of course, love. But that was kind of what I read as the central metaphor of the movie, and lots of people have different readings of it, which is what makes it so amazing.
The movie can also be read in a very compelling and important way as a metaphor for depression, and
Yeah,
especially teen depression. And you know, this idea that she saw in a moment across the infinite possibilities. She's like Doctor Strange, right? She saw,
yeah,
you know, the intimate, infinite ways that her life is a mess, and her mom doesn't know how to love her, and how she feels alone, and she feels like she's part of this grand drama. And I think when we're teenagers, especially if we're depressed teenagers, we feel like we're part of this grand drama, this big drama,
mm-hmm.
in which, you know, these major sacrifices must be made. You must make a sacrifice. You must protect your friends from the evil that is you. You must, you know, save people. If people like you, they just don't know the real you. They don't know the depths of how disappointing you are. And it addresses that, you know, to your point, in a really wonderful sort of sci-fi concept. This, like, it's this everything bagel of despair. It's a black hole that sucks you in and doesn't let anything go and doesn't let anything out. And you know, and the solution, what she's looking for across every iteration of herself and her mother, is one version of her mother who reaches out to her in some way. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be perfect, just some way. I had a suicide attempt. I tried to kill myself when I was 16. And, my dad came and he checked me out of the hospital, and there was a required 3-day hold for me at a mental hospital. And that was the best 3 days of my life in high school because people were nice and listened to me. And he came and he said, do you know what you're doing to your mother? We were never talking about this again. And, I got home and I was supposed to have aftercare. I was supposed to go, get nothing. We never talked about it again. So I immediately began to plan to do it again. So what this movie does in a really meaningful way, I think, is portray this sense that you're not alone, that it does look bad. It does look rough out there. It does feel bad when your parents are cut off from you emotionally, you think, because you can't see them as people that have flaws and have blind spots just like you do. And it offers a way back, and it's through a better understanding of what your parents went through. And that's extraordinary. I don't think we have a lot of I'm using too many superlatives, I know, but I don't think we have a lot of art that does so many things, that
Mm-hmm.
begins to offer a way forward. And it's not like, it's not a salve that you put on a burn. There's stuff that you got to put the work in. But here's a template that says, look, it doesn't matter what other people think. I'm just happy to be with you. I would give up all of this if I could spend the rest of my life doing taxes and laundry with you. Let's try to be kind. And it doesn't mean that I'm stupid or weak, like this culture also wants to teach us, but kindness can actually be really powerful. What if instead of just beating up all these people, I understood what it was that they wanted? I understood the thing that's missing from them, and I had empathy for another person as a human being. It's that term Sonder, I think, where you have this moment of clarity where every other person is as complicated as you are. Wouldn't that make everything different if we could have that, that level of Sonder all the time for people, especially people we feel injured by or don't understand or disappoint, or, and I think this movie offers a way out for us. And it's not easy. It's maybe not even possible. But I'm a little tired of movies that either pretend there's not a problem, or they offer up a sort of toxic positivity, or on the other hand, they offer up this sort of this all-consuming nihilism. They are the everything
Mm-hmm.
bagel movie. And I used to like those movies a lot, and I still do, because it kind of reinforces my worldview. But I realize how dangerous and how slippery that slope is for me sometimes, to not have hope ever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And here's a
Well,
movie that does that.
I want to talk about some of the criticisms of the movie, but first, I want to praise some aspects of the movie from a pure craft perspective. I just want to make sure I get this out there because I feel strongly about it. I do think every single performance in this film is extraordinary. Uh, you already know Michelle Yeoh is going to be awesome, but what you don't expect, and you know James Hong's going to be awesome because he's been in hundreds of movies. But what I was completely blown away by is Ke Huy Quan in this movie after decades of not being in American movies, and it's actually really tragic because seeing him in this movie, you realize decades of Ke Huy Quan performances we were deprived of because those roles didn't exist, because uh, people weren't willing to open themselves to the idea that he could be in them. And the way he switches from Alpha Waymond to the other ones, like the regular one, uh, often within the same shot, is just, there's a high degree of technical difficulty that what he's doing, and I don't know that it's appreciated enough. But I think he's great in this movie. Similarly, Stephanie Hsu is also awesome. I mean, the styles in this movie that she has are great, but at no point did I doubt that this was somebody who had been overwhelmed by the possibilities of the multiverse and was thus heading towards complete despair and nihilism.
Yeah, I mean, my avatar online is short round, so I have a really emotional connection to Ki Kwan, and Stephanie Hsu, the way that she portrays like an American teenager. Yeah, man, I don't think we see that enough. I don't. There's no like. I think there's an Asian kid in Twilight, and he sort of is a practical joker, and he like has a worm at one point, and he wriggles it. So there's no like weird. She's not objectified. She doesn't fall into these easy categories. It isn't just token representation. She's a real life human being, with all sorts of stuff going on with her. And I'm just endlessly grateful for my daughter to have that for her.
Well, she has many awesome
something
moments
else.
throughout the film, but the one that sticks with me is one of her first introductions when she's introduced as Jobu Tapaki, and the movie does this thing where she like cocks her head to the side and like transports through different universes, and it's incredible. Like in one of them, she's like a bus driver, and there's a car about to crash into. It's like, wow. And your brain, and I think this is very intentional. Like they've talked about how the Daniels as directors want you to feel like you are barely keeping up with what is happening. And your brain is just like, oh, I just understood what the cocking of the head means, and now we're already on to the next scene. But when she first transports into like the original universe that we're in the movie, and then her friend Becky is there with her in the bar, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And then she kind of gives Becky this look, and it's just really sinister and dark and upsetting. And like, wow, this person is gonna be up to some shit that you don't want.
Yeah,
I
she's
love that. That's my favorite
extraordinary.
moment in
Yeah.
the film. Of many great moments, that's probably my favorite moment in the film. So
She's extraordinary, and
yeah.
I love the way she delivers the line about the ketchup as well. It's like, oh, don't worry, it's all natural or whatever she says. It's like so,
Yeah.
so insouciant. I guess I love
Yeah.
that. I don't think we see that kind of spunkiness and in that character often enough. I think she's remarkably well written. But something that you said is interesting to me about how there's so much information packed in every frame that you're not sort of intended to grasp it all. I recently talked to Phil Tippett, the special effects legend, who has a new movie, Mad God, which debuted last year in festivals and is coming out on Shudder soon. And he talked about the same thing, about he wanted to pack every frame of this film with too much information, but it's in you anyway. And it might be hours later, or minutes, or days, or weeks, and something will trigger a memory of something that you saw in it. And he said, and I asked him why, and he said, that's the truest for him evocation of dream, of a dreaming state, where you'll have a dream and you won't maybe even remember any of it, but then something will trigger you. You'll be having a nice oatmeal the next day or something. It's like, oh Jesus, I dreamed of I was in a prison in the sky, and my the dog was a hose, and so there's all of this stuff that's in you now, that's been planted in you, and so the film is, I think, dealing with that dream space as well in a fascinating way.
Did you see GQ did an interview with Michelle Yeoh about her roles? A clip from it went viral recently on the internet.
Oh yeah, the video thing where she cried talking about it, right? That she was waiting for a role like this. I did see that. I did.
So I just want to react to that and say a few things about it. So Michelle Yeoh did a thing with GQ where she ran down all the roles she's ever done, or many of her major roles, and talked about them. And then when she got to this film, Everything Everywhere All at Once, she talked about receiving the script and being very moved by it. Because in the script, she could be funny, she could be sad, she could be all these different things that she really hadn't had much opportunity to be before. And she felt seen by the script and the fact that the Daniels wanted to make this movie with her. It's very emotional to watch her talk about it.
To be funny, to be real. Finally, somebody understood that I can do all these things.
So many reactions. First of all, she is Michelle Yeoh, so you think, okay, this is one of the most badass people alive. But even someone like that still just ultimately wants to be seen and doesn't often feel seen, right? Second point is Michelle Yeoh has always struck me as like the most classiest of humans. See her in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. See her in Crazy Rich Asians. This is the one of the definitions of elegance. And she's in this movie with like massive dildos and butt plugs. And I always thought, oh well, she probably just kind of like tolerated the dildos and butt plugs because it was like a way to. And I enjoy that element of the Daniels movie. They kind of celebrate all aspects of the human body. When you watch Swiss Army Man, it's like humans fart and decay and poop, and it's we should enjoy and celebrate that and talk about it. Like I appreciate all that. So I'm not like trying to sex shame or anything. I'm just saying like I don't associate Michelle Yeoh as like super being into that kind of comedy. And I thought maybe she just was like okay with it or she tolerated it. But then when I watched this clip, it like completely changed the narrative for me of like maybe she embraced and welcomed the opportunity to be ribald, to be, jokey about this kind of stuff that is probably not going to be in any of her other films. And anyway, it really stuck out to me because she gets to do everything in this movie, and I think she does it really, really well. So,
and I think there's a meta commentary that's embedded in that interview and your thoughts about it too, in that we put people in boxes. We put our parents in boxes, we put ourselves in boxes, and our friends and our lovers and whatever. We expect them to inhabit a role that we've cast for them, that we've cast them in, and we presume that they're happy there, and that's us. That's a failing of ours as people to various degrees. And the grace of the Daniels to look at Michelle Yeoh's body of work, like we all have, right? Oh man, she learned how to ride a motorcycle. She drove it right off a train. That was the day one. We look at Michelle Yeoh's body of work, and we have her. I always, like you, had her in a box, and I didn't realize it because it's a good box. Everybody wants to be in that box, but we're in a good box.
Internationally known star, well regarded. But
right.
But we don't.
And they tackle that head on in the movie, don't they?
Yeah.
They tackle that head on. International star. Right, but her only friend is this weirdo who's teaching her pinky push-ups. I mean, there's a sacrifice that's being made that we're not appreciating, and in a movie that's about sacrifices that are not appreciated and about different personas that you're not appreciating. This is about the sort of like the manifold panorama of who we are as people. Who are you with your wife? Who are you with your parents? Who are you with your coworkers? Who are you on a weekend? Who are you when you're drunk? All of these things are considered in this movie, and the amount of empathy that engenders in these characters is remarkable. It's like I just in a very literal sci-fi way, I've seen her with hot dog fingers, man, in a lesbian relationship. I've seen everything that this character could possibly encompass in her, could be in her. And that's an act of extraordinary generosity. I think that's what we're both responding to, and what she was responding to when she's talking about it. It's like, how generous of you to understand that I think dildos are funny. How generous of you to look past the elegant ball gown and the Captain Giorgio in Star Trek or whatever and say, yeah, I'll put on hot dog fingers that squirt ketchup and mustard. That makes sense. Sure, I'll voice a rock. Absolutely. That's an act of extraordinary generosity to see people outside of the box that we put them in. And maybe that's what the movie's about. Is even Deidre gets this really like interesting backstory. Everybody gets a moment.
Yeah.
And all of the older timelines teach a lesson about giving moments to people. Yeah. Saying, okay, now I'm looking at my husband especially, and he's not a simpering weakling. There's extraordinary strength in his ability to support us and accept us for who we are. And that's remarkable. It's remarkably generous.
Speaking of that scene, love the fanny pack fight. And I don't know what it is about Asian dads and fanny packs, but like my dad wears a fanny pack. Like he loves having his fanny pack. And they tried to kind of reclaim the fanny pack as a badass weapon of battle, basically, in this movie. And I think they did a great job.
It's just another element that has multiple uses, right? Just like all the people have multiple uses too.
I mean, I thought all the action was pretty great in this movie. There's not that much of it. There's not like 18 action scenes or anything like that. There's like a handful, and they're all really well done. And I think they make really good use of Michelle Yeoh's skills. But my favorite is the one where she first learns how to be good at martial arts. Jamie Lee Curtis like leaps off of this railing and like starts up going straight into her, and then time slows down to 100 frame or like 1,000 frames a second, and then she experiences this whole life where she learns kung fu, and then is able to like Jamie Lee Curtis's knee is like half an inch away from her face, and she's able to like slow down time enough to stop it. It's incredible. It's like I felt like I was watching bullet time in the Matrix. I mean, probably because it was heavily inspired by the Matrix, but you know what I mean? Like for the
Right.
first time, I was watching like an extension of that concept. It felt like pure
Well, and
cinema.
it reclaims that from the Western audience, right? It is as something that we did, and it reclaims, Tarantino with Kill Bill with the flashbacks to how she can get out of the grave by like just punching from an inch or whatever. I mean, it reclaims all of those appropriations, and I don't even mind those appropriations. I love those movies. Don't get me wrong, but it does begin to reclaim some of those things and say, you know what, we were doing this in the 1950s. Do you know who's really good at this? Is Stephen Chow. I don't know what you guys think is action really outside of John Wick right now, but it's garbage because look at The Raid. So it kind of reclaims a lot of this stuff and says, look, not only are we good at this, we can make fun of it. Not only are we good at this, we can do this in a funny way. With like the little like keychain on the fanny pack or whatever hooking onto the nose. It's like that's a level of inventiveness and thought throughedness, I guess, if that's not a word. But that's the level of inventiveness that I adore about sort of kitchen sink movies, where you don't have the beck and call of massive processing frames. What you do have is a sense of fun and play, and you say that this is what we have. We have three elements. How do we make this amazing? And that's the basis of Jackie Chan stuff. It's like, okay, we're in this environment. What do we got? We got a ladder, we got a traffic cone, and we got this belt. So let's make a 30-minute kick-ass 500 extra fight scene based on those three elements. Go. Or just even like different levels, to your point of space. Like, okay, here's someone here, or even at the end, they're just like walking up a short staircase. A sense of space and scale. And, with very little, really, this movie does so much.
I want to ask you about some of the critiques of this movie. I'm curious if you've read some of them. Richard Brody over at The New Yorker called Everything Everywhere All at Once a vapor puff of corporatized fantasy. Many of the reviews, I think, can be summed up in that the messages of the movie are relatively simplistic, right? That's kind of what the bulk of the criticism, I think, boils down to is, hey, life sucks. Grab the fleeting moments of kindness and goodness and love that are in between all the suckiness. And that's ultimately like a very saccharine, overly sentimental viewpoint. We've spent the last hour talking about why we think this movie has a lot to say and has a lot to communicate. I am curious what your reaction has been, if any, to some of the critiques of the film.
Well, I mean, I think that obviously people are entitled to have a negative reaction or no reaction to the film. That's, I can't make them feel something that they don't. I think where it intersects with me personally, where I feel irritated or offended is when it's couched in terms of like exhaustion or like not frustration necessarily, but like exasperation. Like, this, come on. And for me, it's like that's a level of dismissal that is I think deeply disrespectful to the actual discourse, if you will. Like Top Gun Maverick, let's say. I'm very irritated when people are like, well, I hated the first one, what makes me think I'm going to like this one? I'm like, listen to what people are saying about this. Listen to what old timers are saying about how it makes them feel about how goals change as you get older. Listen, people are actually talking about themselves and talking about how things have changed. And I really admire and respect Richard Brody. He has seen more movies than I'll probably get to. I mean, he is one of the old guard. There's been pieces that he's written in the past that have really spoken to me. And his favorite movie last year was Licorice Pizza. And so the things that you love and the things that you hate say a lot more about you than it says about the thing. If you're not able to find anything to connect to and everything everywhere, I would say that's probably you. If you're not able to connect to something that's like, I don't know, some terrible movie, I can't even think of one right now, but if you're not able to connect to something that's probably pretty shallow and doesn't really have that much to say, all right. I mean, maybe there's not a lot there. If somebody
Well, I think
looks
people
at,
are arguing that this is the shallow movie. You and I don't agree with
right,
that,
right, but they wouldn't say that about Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life. But what's that about?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean,
But
honestly, what is that about? It's about sticking to your guns. It's about believing what you believe. I mean,
right.
that's very simple. I mean, what are any of the great movies about?
Yeah.
What's The Godfather about? Is it really complicated, or is it in fact very simple?
Yeah.
If you're going to reduce everything into, hey, all this movie is about is being nice to other people and carpe diem, seizing the day, I'll bet you 9 out of 10 of those people that are criticizing this movie for having that message love Dead Poet Society. There's it's people will find a reason why they don't respond to something, and they'll backwards engineer it. That's what I do when I like something or dislike something. You were always in the process of backwards engineering our reactions to things. Well, why did I feel that way? Why did I cry? Why did this remind me of my mom? Why, we're always backwards engineering if we're doing a good job. If we're not doing a good job, we're saying, well, I cried because it just was manipulative. Or I have a peer who walked out, a peer from a while ago, who walked out in the middle of the assassination of Jesse James. And it was like 10 minutes into it, a press screening. There's like 5 of us in there. He stands up and says, "What is this bullshit?" And he walked out. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually you. That's not really, that's something that you need to be examining. Or when I was watching Synecdoche, New York for the first time with all of my peers who are these much older at that time than me and contemplating their first cancer or their first whatever, and they're watching Synecdoche, New York, and he's like, when Caden is like going through his poop to see if he's bleeding, they were visibly upset, visibly uncomfortable, looking around. Most of them slammed it in the local paper and stuff, and it's like, okay, so rather than examining why this movie made you very unhappy, as like that's pretty true of aging and dying, and it's like you better hold on because time flies. That's what Synecdoche, New York is about. Tempest Fugit, time flies. Pretty simplistic, but it isn't the what. I think it's the how it goes about it, right? I mean, I think everything everywhere. Yeah, it's about being kind to one another. It's about accepting other people with complicated things. It's about those things. How does it go about it? Well, how much time you got? Because it goes about it in ways that everybody, all this grand collection of people, different people, are attaching to. So you can look at all of that reaction to it, and you can take this position of like, no, actually, you guys, it means nothing. It means nothing. It doesn't mean that to you. It doesn't mean that to anybody. It means nothing. You can do that, but you're a dick. And more than that, you are not self-examined enough or actualized enough in your own life to understand why it is a story about a Chinese family means nothing to you. And so that's the issue. And it's like when I look at Black Panther, when I was writing about Black Panther, I was like, this is a fine movie that has extraordinary cultural import for a culture that I don't know and don't understand. But I see this outpouring of emotion from the Black community watching Black Panther, feeling exalted and raised up by it. And who am I to say, actually, you guys, this doesn't mean anything. That didn't do that for you because it didn't do it for me. Without, and if I felt like that, if I did feel like that, I would have to really strongly examine why it is that I don't think Black people have those emotions, or why it is I don't think women have those emotions, or why it is I have that falls on you now to have a process of like, why does Licorice Pizza, the story about, a Haim sister, grooming a young man, or whatever in 1970s America, why is that my favorite movie over this movie, which is about an Asian family deciding that they will accept each other and love each other at the end of it? What is it that's more complex about Licorice Pizza than Everything Everywhere? I would say that's a you problem. And if I'm willing to listen, if you're willing to go through it with me.
I just want to say in closing that I've been so happy at how well this movie has done at the box office. It is now the highest grossing domestic A24 film of all time. The drops that it was from week to week, usually a movie drops 40, 60%. This movie is dropping 3%, 15%. Sometimes it was even gaining from week to week. It's been incredible to see. There's clearly something about this movie that's resonated with so many people. And Walter, I've been really grateful to talk about it with you. Walter Chaw is a film critic at Film Freak Central. I'll put links to his review of Everything Everywhere All at Once, as well as his Twitter account down below in the description and in the podcast show notes. But Walter, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, whenever you pick up the phone, I answer it, Dave. So I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us today here on the YouTube channel. I want to thank Walter Chaw again for joining me. Really appreciate it. Be sure to follow him on Twitter. Check out his review at Film Freak Central. I want to thank all my patrons at patreon.com/Dave Chen. Specifically, I want to thank my executive producer patrons, Kevin Sau, Ian, Stephen Miller, Sid Yadav, Steve Austin, Kwang Yu Lu, Dan Flanagan, Jeff Evans, and Mark Warner. Thank you so much. Thanks also to all my other patrons at patreon.com/Dave Chen. You are the reason why I can do what I'm doing. If you want to support me and my work, patreon.com/Dave Chen. Until the next time, we'll see you later.